it's caused a lot of upset and anger. I completely understand that, but I don't have any new information. I don't have anything else to tell you about it, so I don't want to dwell upon it. It hasn't changed what you need to teach. It hasn't changed the way you assess. All it's changed is so if you need to know anything, out of the way so that we can crack on and get a really good support session going. I am aware that there's lots of centres who are now teaching it over 3 years, and they're starting in year 9. Now, I think that's a really good way to get started, and there's lots of students out there who will really benefit. Some of the subjects are quite grown up, quite mature themes. So if you're looking at year 9 students, just be aware that some of the content and the topics is quite grown up for them. Death, addiction, you could be looking at some quite grown up topics. It's assessed through assignments and one external task. The external task is a 2-hour task that the students sit in either February or they sit in May, June. So there's 2 sitting windows per year, and the students can sit twice in 1 year. So you sit once in the first year, once in the second year, once in the second year, once in the third year, whichever combination you like. They can sit whenever you feel that the students are ready. They've got 2 opportunities, so they can take the external and then have a resit. So if you feel that they want to get a better grade, put them in for that resit. Right, okay, so the 3 components build on each other, and lots of our students say that it really helps them with confidence and really helps them because we use real life scenarios. So using those kind of real life situations and them looking at local areas will really help them to be able to build their confidence and understand what it's like to work in a health and social care department setting. And it's internally assessed, and it's 30% of the total course. Component 2, health and social care values, that's internally assessed and is again 30% of the course. Component 3 is health and wellbeing, that's externally assessed and is 40% of the total course. To achieve the course and achieve a grade, the students have to achieve at least a level 1 pass in all components to pass the course. So they must get at least level 1 pass to be able to get an overall qualification. What we would say to you is that we really want the students to be aiming for a level 2. So a level 1 is kind of, what is there just in case they don't quite get there. But what I would say to you is that they should all be going for that level 2 pass at least. And lots of your students are well capable of it. I've been talking to lots of teachers and they've all said their students really love it because it's such a good course and it's got such good content. They can use people that they know and they find that really useful. So component 1, now this one's quite a biggie. It's quite a big task, and it's about producing a fact file about your life stages. The students pick 3 life stages. And the life stages are available in the specification so that you can have a look at it. So if we look at component 1, so you can stages and it will give you the list of life stages that the students can choose. The students choose 3 life stages and they produce a fact file about the person that they've chosen. Now the 3 life stages do not need to be concurrent, so they can choose infants, they can choose early adulthood and then choose later adulthood. It doesn't matter which 3 life stages they choose. They can choose whichever ones that they feel confident in doing. And obviously you need to describe that in terms of pies. So they will use and social development, if they've chosen footballers to do health and social care. So if they find that they can do this about a footballer, it gives them that sort of confidence to look up information. What else can be? So it's worth bearing in mind that they've got to find enough information. That's one of the things that we found, is that they've sometimes picked somebody and it's really difficult to find any kind of information on them. It is up to them to kind of research the person. So you may have to also, students might have to think about what might happen. So if they're doing somebody like Lady Gaga and they choose older adulthood, what might happen to Lady Gaga in older adulthood? Because she's obviously not in that life stage at the moment, but that's absolutely fine. They can really think about what might happen. It's about quality, and I'm going to get this tattooed across my forehead, and not so much about quantity. It's really easy for your students to just go out and research and do lots and lots of pages and pages of work, and some of it is not really relevant to their assessment. They need to be making sure that they're looking at the 3 life stages and looking at the pies. So it can be really important they don't go off on a tangent or start waffling on about stuff, because it means that you end up with huge quantities of work, which means that you've got to mark it. There's sample marks learner work for the component. As I said, it's based on Cheryl Cole. Cheryl, I have no idea what she's called anymore, sorry. And you can have a look at that. So for 1B, so that was for learning aim A. For 1B, learners have to produce an information pack about 2 people who've been affected by the same life event. Now, I've had lots and lots of questions from teachers about this, about how, which kind of life events they can use. The life events must come from the list that's in the specification, where we were looking just a moment ago. And it has to be the same type of life event. So it could be 2 people who suffered an accident, but exactly the same accident, is really, really slim. So it's fine to find somebody who's perhaps had a car accident, or somebody who's perhaps been in another type of accident. We've had lots of people who've been looking at the young lady who lost a limb at Alton Towers, because it was in the news last year. So it can be anything, but it has to be 2 people. So it can be 2 people who've been affected by bereavement. You know, maybe somebody who's lost a parent, maybe somebody who's lost a child. It doesn't have to be exactly the same thing. So as a teacher, you can produce case studies and give those to your students, but they really need to be about real people. And it's worth you going on and just sort of, investigating those real people. Now, if you use case studies, that's absolutely fine, but you have to be really aware that the students will all be using the same case studies. So you must be careful that the students are not producing the same work. And they must be producing something separately. So they must be going away and producing that work independently, and not sitting next to somebody and writing exactly the same thing. Well, you gave us a case study, miss, so therefore the work would be exactly the same. That's not what we're looking for. There's lots of great examples out there. Like I was saying, I talked to a lot of teachers last year who were using the young lady who lost a limb at Alton Towers. I can't actually remember what her name is. Lots of people from the armed forces who'd suffered really life-changing injuries, and the sort of support that they had. 2 people going through a divorce, and the sort of support that they had, the different types of support. So I wouldn't recommend a mother and father going through a divorce. You need to be looking at 2 kind of separate people, or 2 people who've just retired. That's a really good one, because lots of people who retire need some support, and you could even, begin to look at, what happens when people retire. Right. Okay. So component 2. So it's more about how the health and social care sector work. Again, we've got care values that lie at the core, and that's really important. The care values are one of the most important things all the way through this qualification. Care values are what your students are going to use when they go out into practice, or if they go on to level 3, they'll have to know about the care values. That's really, really important. Obviously, we've got assignment briefs. I should have said that back then. We have assignment briefs for all the internals. So we've got the 2 assignment briefs, one for component 1, one for component 2. And we also have provided case studies for component 2 part A. So we've got Verna and Sam and somebody else, I think. What is really important about this part of the component is that you look at the local services that are in your local area. So you're looking at whether there's day centres, doctors' surgeries, hospitals, what those services are available in your local area. Really helps the students because they begin to think about what's in their local area and makes them think about kind of what needs to be put there, what might need to be put there, and that really helps them if they're then going on to level 3. Make sure that your learners read what they're required to do. It's important that they understand command words, that they understand criteria, and that they understand that they should be working for level 2. So they should be working for at least a level 2 pass and not just saying, well, I can do level 1, doesn't matter, does it? So just make sure that they're working at that level. So learning aim B, this one I get lots and lots of questions about. Students love doing role plays, really love doing role plays. Some of them really love it and some of them really hate it. It's a bit of one of those kind of Marmite things. So they have to demonstrate the 7 care values, and there's a list of those 7 care values in the specification. This can be done using 1 role play, or it can be done with doing 2 role plays. The specification actually states that if a second role play is required, it's usually only because the learners weren't able to demonstrate the 7 care values in 1 role play. However, the assignment brief asks for 2 role plays. It asks for a group role play and a one-to-one role play. Now, if you're going to only ask your students to do 1 role play and use the second one as a kind of, extra bit if they don't quite get there, then you need to adjust the authorised assignment brief to show that. If you're happy to do 2 scenarios and 2 role plays, then you're absolutely fine to do that, and it will ensure that whatever happens, the students will have covered those 7 care values. And some care values that is, are quite one-to-one. Some care values can be demonstrated in a kind of a group environment. Now, I've had lots of people who've talked about using real life settings. So they've got their students have managed to get out into work placement, and they've used those work placements to demonstrate the 7 care values. That's absolutely fantastic. Or you can write your own scenario, so you can change the scenarios and write one that you think your students will be more comfortable with. But you have to make sure that you're adapting the authorised assignment brief to show this. Obviously, learners can use props. I had a teacher who asked me the other day, and she said, I've got these students and they're really brilliant at their role play. They've been helping somebody put a cardigan on, get dressed and use a walking frame. Is that all right? Can I use that? Is that okay? And yeah, absolutely fine. They can use props. That's not a problem. They just can't use notes and scripts if they are going for a level 2 pass. Level 2 pass states that they can't have any notes, so they will have to practice it a bit. Learners can, if they're a little bit shy about doing it perhaps in a classroom setting, they could go home and do it at home with a friend, video them on their mobile phones, and then show you the video, and you could write your feedback about it, or you could do it in a one-to-one session with them. We've had lots of students who've got quite severe anxiety, and they found it much easier if they do it one-to-one with a teacher. And that way you can see the 7 care values being demonstrated, but they don't feel that they're being watched all the time, and they have to be in front of somebody to do it. If they're comfortable doing it just in front of you, that's really good. Obviously, you've got to provide the learners with the feedback that gives them an idea of how well they did, whether they did really, really well, or whether there's areas that they need to improve. And you can do that by using the record of practical activity that we have on our paperwork page, which I will show you in a moment. You can adapt that and make sure that that meets the needs of the learners. They have to have individual feedback to allow them to reflect on their performance. So it's important that you're providing individual feedback for each student. And also, if you look on the sample marked learner work, there's a really clear example of how that can be done and how the practical activity form actually works. So there's some really good example. There's a really good example in the sample marked learner work. Right, component 3. Now this is our external task, and it's all about bringing together all the knowledge that the students have achieved in the 2 other scenarios. It's a synoptic external, so it's recommended that you put the students in towards the end of the course, because they will have had all the learning for the other 2 components, which will help them with the component 3. It's complete in a 2-hour task on a date set by us, and the exam timetables have been finalised and the dates are available. There's 2 windows a year, as I've said before, one in February, one in May, June. And we've got lots of information out there that can help you prepare your students. We've got past papers, mark schemes, examiner reports, an examiner walkthrough that talks about the sample assessment material that you can use as a mock paper, and additional sample assessment material as well. Past papers obviously are really good to use as a mock, because it will allow you to see how the students are performing, and they'll be able to understand how the paper is set out and the command words that they will need to be using. So whether it's identify, state, give, assess, whatever it is. And also they'll be able to work out the timing for each question. Now it's a 2-hour task, and students think, oh, that's 2 hours, that's ages. But actually, when you come to answering those questions, the time goes really, really quickly. And towards the end, where they have to produce a plan for a person, then there is obviously, they need to have time to be able to do that. They need to have time to be able to write those long answer questions that are towards the end of the paper. So it's really good practice if you can just get them to do papers and get them to do some long answer questions. Sample assessment material for the external component, and there's 2 examples of what a paper will look like and the format of the questions, because we've now sat the paper twice. We sat it last February. I didn't. It was sat last February and it was sat in June again. So we've now got 2 papers and we've got 2 mark schemes and 2 examiners' reports. So there's lots of good information out there to help you prepare your students for the external. So I've just kind of come up with some top tips that I think might be useful for you. These are the sort of things that I used to do with my students. My students used to really love doing a glossary of terms. It was really, really good. So they used to put together all the words that they thought they might need to use. So all the command words, any words that had specific terminology, anything at all that they think is might be useful. It's a great learning and revision tool. It's really, really good for students. Okay, another thing you could do is produce your own questions and use them in the lessons. Use them as a starter activity or an end of lesson activity, and get your students to kind of peer assess each other. You know, oh, you answered that question really well. What words did you use? They then can start putting words back in that glossary. Use lots of scenarios in your teaching. Get the students used to extracting information. Get them to produce their own questions, their own scenarios. It'll get them used to, answering questions and things like that. Okay, so ensure that students are answering questions using the information given. Now, it's really, really common that students see the scenario and just copy down what's written on the scenario. That's not showing their knowledge. They must show their knowledge while answering those questions and not just rewrite whatever's been written in the scenario. Ensure students are reading the question. With practice questions, let them highlight the important information, age of the person, whether it's male or female. That's really, really important. And it's really important that they get the hang of going through and reading that scenario. And each question will have an extra bit of scenario. So there'll be a scenario, some questions, and then there'll be another bit of the scenario. So they need to be able to look back and remember what was in that first part of the scenario. So whether it was somebody who was living in a flat with parents or children, whatever it was, they need to be able to remember that. Okay, so after students have sat component 3, we get an examiner's report. That's really, really valuable information. It will let you see how the paper has performed and how the learners have performed. It'll give some tips on what learners are missing. It'll give tips on what learners have done really, really well. And that's where I say about terminology. It always comes up in the examiner's report is that students don't always use the correct terminology. So it's really good that they start by putting that glossary together and learning the scenario. It's got really good information. It will have examples of really good answers, questions, and it will have some really some not so good answered questions, and it will show you exactly how those marks were awarded, which is really, really important when you come to prepare your students for the exam, to be able to see what they were expected to do. Now, in February last year, the lead examiner produced a talk through of the examiner's report, and that's got some really good information. It's got some really good tips. It's got some really good answers that you can see. Now, what I would say to you is it's quite long. You'll probably need some time to watch it, or you'll need to watch it in bits. And what you need while you're watching that, you'll need the question paper, the marking grid, so the answers, and you'll need the examiner's report that she's talking about. And that'll give you such good information. If you can spare half an hour, 45 minutes to see it, it would be really great. Right, resources. Lots of information in the specification, like I showed you before. The specification is your go-to, your Bible. It's the thing that you need to be using. I have not taught this qualification because it wasn't around when I was teaching, but I know so much about it just from reading the specification and by talking to you lot, obviously. And it's really, really valuable. Everything in the specification is up to date. What I would say to you is, don't download the specification and never look at it again. Make sure that every month or so you go back onto the website and have a look and see whether we've updated the specification. Now, I'll tell you in my monthly updates whether there's been any kind of changes to the specification. It's unlikely it'll be anything. It's small. It'll be small things, wording, things like that. There's schemes of work for all 3 components. All of them have got a scheme of work. You don't have to use that scheme of work, or just use it as a guide and adapt it for your own teaching. Authorised assignment briefs, again, there is authorised assignment briefs for component 1 and component 2. You don't have to use them, but if you're new to teaching the qualification, I would recommend that you do use them, because it will really give you an idea of what we are expecting. What I would say to you is look at the format that the students are handing work in. So whether it's an information manual, that kind of thing. If you want to change it, absolutely fine, change it. As long as the students are hitting that criteria, then you're absolutely fine. Make sure that if you write a new assignment brief, you write it with the specification beside you, and you're also making sure that there's guides to internal assessment that will help you too, and I'll show you the page where those are in a moment. There's sample marked work for component 1 and component 2, and that shows you exactly what we're expecting and exactly what the kind of things that a student might produce is. Component 2 is a really good example of where people have changed the assignment brief. They've changed it to reflect that they need to complete 1 role play rather than 2, but just make sure that it is IV'd and checked before you give it to any students and it meets the criteria. There is a textbook available. It's not a requirement to purchase it, and the course is totally able to be taught without it. But there is lots of good information in there. Right, okay, so paperwork. This is another question that people ask me all the time. For the Tech Award, you use the same BTEC paperwork for every other BTEC. So if you're used to BTECs, you've been teaching them before, it's the same paperwork. So any paperwork that you might need can be found on the webpage BTEC Assessment and Verification Tools. The grade calculator is really good if you want to work out how your students are doing and you want to kind of see where they're going. And there's one for the Tech Award just here. As the lead IV for the BTEC Tech Award on Edexcel Online. There's a really good page that's about the QA process and helps you prepare. And they've updated all the guides. So there's guide to quality assurance, very might need link. He oversees the course and can authorise IV. You check the assessor's marking to ensure fairness. You're not checking that they're doing it right, you're just checking the processes. And your assessor, which is what we all are, teaches the learners and marks the work that's been produced. An assessor cannot internally verify their own work. There has to be somebody else who can assess it, who can verify it. The assessor can be the lead IV. Quality nominees, they oversee all the BTEC courses across your centre, and they should have a really good idea about kind of, any communications and things like that quite often get sent to them. After everything, you've taught everything. So you've taught the unit, or halfway through you've taught the unit, you need to give them the assignment brief. Talk to them about what you're expecting from them, and then talk to them about where they can complete that work. Are you giving them time in class to complete it? Are they doing it at home? Are they doing it during free lessons? Make sure that they know when they're completing. And the work is then marked by an assessor and checked by an IV and the lead IV. Okay, so just really, really quickly, we've already looked at the grade, each of the components about grading. Box that tells you how the student will be graded. So to get a level 2 pass, the learner has to satisfy all the level 2 pass criteria. So they've got to have got all the level 2 pass criteria. So if you look up here, that means they've got to describe growth and development, impact of the life. That's the way you're going to work out how it works. And then when you've got an overall grade, you can then use our grade calculator. That's all up and running. So the health and social care communities are there for you to ask questions. So you can ask questions of me, you can ask questions of other teachers. And here is the health and social care community. So you can see that I've put the information out there who can help me with this, and I'll answer it in the communities. If it's a very complicated question or it's a very private sort of question, then I'll ask you to drop me an email and I'll answer it via email rather than in the kind of public forum that is the communities. There's also one for childcare if you're teaching childcare as well. And if you want to sign up for my monthly updates, I do an update every month. I'm just getting October's ready at the moment. There's a link on the subject page or on the bottom. If you've ever been emailed by me, there's a link on the bottom of my email signature. Okay, any questions? I'm going to put the floor over to you. I'm going to let you put the chat in the chat box while I just have a really good cough. Okay, I've had a good cough. So has anybody got any questions? If they could put them in the chat box. If I put them in the chat box, then everybody can see them and they can see what I'm writing. Yep. Yes. Let's put that. Somebody just asked, so coursework can be completed at home? Absolutely. Yes, it can be completed at home. Alison, that's a really good question. I hope you don't mind just so if I say it to the whole audience, but Alison just was asking, component 1A, does it have to be on a famous person or family member? Yes, it needs to be on a real person because it needs to be somebody out there that you can find all the information for. Any more questions? So Joanne was just asking if the component 1A could be a teacher. Yeah, it can be anybody as long as the students are aware of confidentiality. And that they're really careful that they're not that you're not telling them any kind of really personal information. It would be quite difficult to do a teacher, I would have thought, because it is the kind of information that you're collecting is very confidential. I'm not sure how much of that you would want your students to know. Has anybody got any other questions? Thanks, Joanne. Okay, if everybody's happy and they all want to go home because it's 10 to 4 and I can go away and have a really good cough. Thank you very much for attending. I hope I've been some help to you. I hope we've given you some information that you hadn't thought about before, and that if there's any questions after the session, thanks, Joanne. I will have another Seether. Just drop me an email. All right. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much.